So it's one of those Sundays. This is another difficult text. I'll go through some of those more difficult parts, but it's one of those texts where our acclamation sounds more like a question than a statement. Thanks be to God. Question mark. Jesus speaks of not one stone being left upon another. Wars and insurrections, nation against nation, great earthquakes, famines and plagues, dreadful signs. And there's more. They will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to people in places of authority. You'll be betrayed. Some of you will even be put to death. Thanks be to God. Question. Where's the good news today? How can there be good news in all of that? Well, I had to go back to the history books this week, and I'm glad I did. I wanted to better understand the world in which Luke is writing. And it turns out this gospel is dated somewhere around the year 85, so 50 years or so after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Luke is writing to a group of early Christians, and they've already endured quite a lot. Did you know that there was a Jewish revolt in 66 which led to the destruction of the Second Temple? That temple had taken 75 years to build. It stood at the center of Jewish life, much in the way that the original temple had. It was bigger and better, built to last. Instead, that temple was destroyed as Rome squashed the Jewish rebellion. That temple was parted out, pieced out, and paraded all the way back to Rome. Not long after that, somewhere around the year 79, Mount Vesuvius erupts. Ash goes into the atmosphere about 20 miles. Pompeii is leveled. That eruption was preceded by earthquakes in 62 and 64. Halley's Comet appeared in the sky in 66. This is at a time in the first century where there's no such thing as light pollution. Can you imagine how bright Halley's Comet must have been in that night sky? Rome burned in 64. Nero blamed it on the Christians. Many died. Nero himself died 4 years later. Civil war ensued. The Roman Empire had 4 emperors in a single year. I told you I went back to the history books this week. The Colosseum would be finished in the year 80. Christians would die there too. Those who refused to worship Roman gods, which would have included the emperor himself, many were sentenced to die in the arena. The further back you go, the more there is to notice. Luke is writing in the midst of uncertainty and calamity and some amount of inhumanity. Luke and his first century audience are living in the midst of upheaval and what would seem to be chaos in all sorts of directions. We may have to dig a little to get to the good news this week, but it's there. We may have to sift through a little chaos and some rubble, but underneath it, at the bottom of it, is a word of life. There's a word of hope here. For marginalized people living in difficult times, there is a word of persistence and promise underneath the debris of earthquakes and insurrections. There's good news buried in the messiness of this text, particularly in verse 8. Jesus says, "Beware that you aren't led astray. Many will come saying the end is near. Don't follow them. Many will come selling fear and chaos. Don't buy in. Don't be afraid." Many will come. Chaos and upheaval too. Earthquakes and wars and famines and plagues. But stand firm. Persist in faith. In faith you'll live. Endure and there'll be another day. Have faith and I'll give you all that you need. There's life in me, Jesus says. I'll give you the words. I'll give you the wisdom. I'll give you life. The good news of this text is a word of endurance and faith and freedom. Many will come. Don't give up. Don't follow the fear. Don't buy into that absence. Follow me, Jesus says. I'm enough. That got me to thinking about this revised common lectionary that we use. It's interesting to me. I don't know how interesting it really is, but it's interesting to me. This lectionary is a systematic way of reading the Bible. It's a system that was originally designed in community with the larger church, so Methodists and Presbyterians and Episcopalians and Catholics and Lutherans. Our services are built around a 3-year rotation of readings. We follow the lectionary. It was originally published in 1983. Before that, there was a different system, but still a system of pre-selected text. It was revised in 92. Every 2 years, we repeat this cycle. This year, we're reading from Luke, this church year. And year C is about to end, and we'll start reading in year A, which is Matthew, and after that, Mark in year B. And John is sprinkled throughout each of the 3 years. We get John each of the 3 years. How interesting it is the way that these texts speak each week. As if they know us. God always seems to know just what to say. This text was waiting for us on this week in 2016. Text that was set into motion more than 20 years ago when this lectionary was published. God is at work in that, I believe. I'll give you the words, Jesus says, and the wisdom when you need them. Luke's testimony is the product of a difficult time. For a people living in the midst of difficult times, it's a testimony that encourages us to follow the only one who matters. In and amongst the disruptions and disasters, in and amongst the fear and the noise, it's a gift to dwell in this text this week. There has been a lot of fear and uncertainty on the television and in the streets and in our homes. Don't let it lead you astray, Jesus says. Follow me. Love one another. Bear with one another. Give and share with one another. Feed the poor. Heal the sick. Pray for your enemy. Sermon on the Plain, last week's word, meets us again today. The questions and uncertainties and upheavals will always be with us. All of it clear and present, all of it very real. There was an earthquake this morning in New Zealand. There are tsunami warnings now in that area. There are earthquakes in Oklahoma in our time. Plagues, Zika virus, West Nile, bird flu. Nation against nation is a reality of our time. Many will say the end is near. It's tempting. The Cubs won. Don't follow the fear, Jesus says. Follow me. Look to me. The world will disappoint and unsettle and challenge and stretch us. The world will surprise us in beautiful ways too. Endure in me, Jesus says. Remain in that way. I will provide all that you need. That's a word of good news. God's provision. Christ's faithfulness. It's a word for this week and every week. And for that word, we say thanks be to God. Amen.